looking at texture images now, and the reason that sometimes these things show up gray in Archicad. There's a few issues here. So one of them is simply where the sun position is and what the 3D settings are. If you go to your perspective settings, there's the sunlight options here. Opposite direction of the sun, you can bump up the ambient light, and that'll make the side that the sun is not facing look a little bit cleaner and whiter. But that tends to wash out the side that is facing the sun. So you need to kind of find a balance here. I think that between 65 and 85 on the contribution, the ambient light, is a little bit better. And you can play around with those a little bit to get it to look white on both sides, or a little bit whiter. The other thing is the simple shading. Obviously you want to make sure that it's not too washed out here. We don't have a whole lot of control over a lot of this in the OpenGL settings, but turning sun shadows off can sometimes help with that. If we switch to simple shading with shadows, for example, that will oftentimes make it even more of a glaring contrast from one side to the other, or especially if there's shadows casting across the same wall. Additionally, we have the surface settings. So the surface color has no bearing on this whatsoever. The color emission, we don't want it to actually emit a color. If you, for example, bump this all the way to white and 100%, you can see how that just immediately blasts the whole thing out. So typically what I do is I'll bump this to a gray or even a black to get that to not emit too much of a color, but you can see there it goes from white to gray. So here, for example, on this side I have almost no brick showing. So unless you have really, really bold, dark grout lines, you're not going to see that there. So we want to make sure that our brightness of the emission is, or sorry, attenuation is set as dark as we can get it. You can also bump that way, way down. The other part of this is also the reflection settings. So typically this is kind of the range that I look at, is ambient, diffuse, and shininess at about 85, 85, 25, anywhere from 10 to 25, and you can play around with that. If I bump that down, it's going to get a little bit darker, especially on the side not facing the sun. But again, this is sort of a factor of Archicad's view engine. Now if we switch out that image that's being used here, and these are just images that I derived from or pulled from SketchUp Warehouse. But if I switch this out for another brick color here, here's sort of an off-white color, more realistic looking brick. But it's going to give a different reaction to those surface settings. So here it's more of that off-white. I'm not going to get that pure white out of this surface. But I do get more realistic grout lines. So a lot of it is just the quality of the image that's being used. If you want it to be a true white, this might need to be photoshopped a little bit, but generally speaking, it's all in these reflection and glowing settings. The specular glow color should be relatively low, but again, dropping that down a little bit is going to darken it up a little bit. Also, usually that I set that specular glow to a white color. If you set that to dark, it shouldn't have very much bearing at all because it's set so low. But those are sort of some things to think about. If you really need a view to look white on both sides, you might just need to adjust where the sun's position is so that you're getting that natural sunlight on that side when you take the screenshots or the renderings or whatever. Otherwise, you can bump up the ambient light, but then you still need to only take the view from the side that doesn't have the sun on it. So it's really just a balance of where that sun position is here and the perspective settings, and then how much that sun is contributing to the ambient lighting of your model. Dropping that down can make it look very gray on the shadows, but not too washed out, and a little bit white on the other side.